Then we have Shirley Howe. She is from PCCY, which is an awesome organization. They also have information outside too. If you have not stopped at their table afterwards, please stop by their table. And we have two students here. Michelle Ortez, and she's a student from Penn-led High School. She will be graduating this year, correct? Yes. And we have Jamara Miller, and Jamara, you graduated last year, correct? Yes. Okay. And on her way is Ms. Joan Duval Flynn from the Pennsylvania NAACP. So I'm going to take this time to allow my audience to allow the panel to explain their position.
Yes, hi everybody. So my job is to sort of give you an overview of what's wrong with Pennsylvania school funding. And apologies to Sheila for sort of standing over her. But I'm a staff attorney at the Public Interest Law Center, and along with the Education Law Center and a law firm called O'Melveny Myers, based out of New York, we're representing the school district and families and others in the school funding lawsuit. So I want to first give you an overview of why we think this system is broken and then what we're doing about it. So there are sort of some themes when we talk about Pennsylvania school funding for the core problems. We'll get into them specifically, but just to give you a little bit of a roadmap or an overview. The first is that the state of Pennsylvania makes a relatively low share of the contribution to public education in the state. So as a result of that, in a state that has 500 school districts, fairly economically segregated, when the state only puts in a small amount of money, about 34% of every dollar spent on education. Local communities have to make up that difference, and so those that can do and those that can't. The second is sort of a fundamental failure that I don't think most people understand, which is that each year, despite the constitutional obligations that we'll get to, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has no goal whatsoever of fully funding public schools. There is no goal of giving every child the resources they need. There is no process each year where the Commonwealth, where the state legislature says, okay, what does school district A need? What does school district B need? Instead, they just decide how much money they're going to give out, which is largely based on what they gave the year before. I skipped one, which is that most of the funding is not based on any rational formula, which I'll also get to. And the fourth is that, as a result, and something this community especially is familiar with, it creates really unfair property tax burdens, and not in the way that I think is commonly understood. And the fifth is that it creates unacceptable outcomes for our kids. There's a lot of good stuff going on in the schools of Pennsylvania, but the reality is that achievement scores, while not the be-all and end-all, are not good enough, and kids are going to school in conditions that don't really befit what they deserve. So if you add up every dollar spent on public education in Pennsylvania, about 60% of it comes from local taxpayers, from school taxes, and about 34% of it comes from the state, and the federal government fills in the rest. But this is going to take a minute to explain. One of the things we often say is that Pennsylvania has the most inequitable system of education funding in the country, and here's where that comes from. All right, so what you're looking at is a bar chart where every bar is a state, okay? And it's a ratio within each state. It's about how a state's poorest districts, its lowest wealth districts, are treated versus highest wealth districts. Okay? And if in a state, state and local resources combined, if in that state, the lowest wealth districts have more to spend per student, you're above that line, right? So all the way to the left, this is the data is a few years old. But what that means is all the way to the left here in Indiana, the lowest wealth districts have more to spend, 17% more to spend per child than the highest wealth districts, right? Which makes sense if you agree that kids that are coming from poverty have higher needs. The median state is equality. So in the median state, state funding is progressive enough that everyone has the same. And then all the way over here is Pennsylvania, right? Sorry again for walking behind you. But in Pennsylvania, the lowest wealth districts have 34% less per child than the highest wealth districts, right? And we're not just last, right? We're not just the most inequitable. The distance from us to next to last is almost the distance from next to last to the median. And here's how some of those disparities play out and how the property tax burdens play out. So up on the screen is every school district in this county, in Delaware County. And property tax rates are kind of opaque because there's a millage, it's an assessed value, it's not often 100% of the value of your house. And so what the state has done is it comes up with an effective property tax rate for each school district to give you a sense so you can compare apples to apples and see, as a percentage of the value of your home, who's paying more. And so what you see in the second column is what we call equalized mills. And all the way at the top, the Marple Newtown School District, their tax burden, their equalized mills is 12.6. So practically what that means is that each year, the taxpayers in that community pay 1.26% of the value of their home each year in school taxes, right? And what you see just in the districts of just Delaware County, a fairly compact county, is that the tax rates vary wildly. So all the way at the bottom is the William Penn School District, right? Where the effective property tax rate is 32.8, right? 3.28% of the value of your home. But because this community does not have the same wealth as Marple, Newtown, or Radnor, the next column over tells you how much funds you get from that tax rate. So while Marple Newtown raises $18,000 from their tax rate, a tax rate significantly lower than this one, the William Penn School District only raises $8,200 per child, right? It's just a function of how much wealth you have, right? If you have if you can tax $1 million house, you don't have to tax it at a higher rate. So let's just compare a couple districts, just to show you. Okay, so Radnor, again, a tax rate of about 13.8 equalized mills. From that tax rate generates almost $20,000 per child. The state kicks in about $3,200 to Radnor, and so state and local resources combined, Radnor has $23,000. William Penn, again, equalized mills of or tax burden of 32.8. Generates $8,200. Now the state does kick in more to this school district than it does to Radnor. State funding is progressive, the state piece of it. More money goes to lower wealth districts. Not enough, and it's not progressive enough, and it's not large enough, but it is progressive. But it's not enough to close the gap, right? So Radnor, state and local resources combined, has about $8,000 more per child than the William Penn School District. Let's look at two more, different counties. The Tredyffrin Easttown School District, very good school district, okay? A tax rate of about 12 equalized mills. From that, they generate $15,000 per child. The state kicks in about $2,700 to Tredyffrin, and they have about $17,500 per child. The Reading School District is one of our poorest in this Commonwealth. Reading has a tax rate of almost exactly twice that. But from that, they generate $2,200. Right, 1/7 of the funds. The state, again, kicks in more to Reading, but it's not nearly enough to make up the gap, and so Reading has over $6,000 less per child. You know, and so who needs more? Who needs more from a school district like Tredyffrin to a school district like Reading? One of the most common indicators of how much a district needs is the poverty rate in the district. Kids who are in poverty come with higher needs. They might come hungry, they might come from trauma. Reading, 80% of kids are in poverty. Another resource-intensive group is kids that are learning English, right? They need smaller class sizes, for example. 1.5% of the kids in Tredyffrin are English language learners. In Reading, it's 1 in 5, 20% are English language learners. right? So the school districts that need more have less. And I'm really happy to be up here with Power, and be in a panel sponsored by Power. There's a guy from Power named David Masenkis who started to pick apart some other inequities in our school funding. Okay? And this graph is from before we had a funding formula, although it was, in a lot of ways, the funding formula sort of backed up what he did. And what he decided to do is look at the distribution of state school funding, just the state piece of it. Okay? And so what you're looking at, it's going to take a minute to explain, but what you're looking at is a chart where every school district, the y-axis, the vertical axis, is how much state funding you get. And the x-axis is your poverty rate. Okay? And every dot on there is a school district. All right? And so that's how much state funding, and then there's an expected line, which is that line. So if I told you your poverty rate, if I told you should be able to find what your expected school funding is, right? So if your poverty rate is 30%, I can tell you how much funding you should get. So if you're above that line, you're getting more than you would expect as a function of your poverty. And if you're below that line, you're getting less than you would expect as a function of your poverty, right? Now, as you can see, there are two colors to these dots. Right? The median school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has 8% children of color. If you have less than 8% children of color, if you're a whiter school district, you're a yellow dot. If you have more than 8% children of color, you're a brown dot. The pattern is pretty clear. We did, in the last year, have a victory of sorts, which is that the state finally did enact a funding formula for how it distributes education funds. And the funding formula has some real strengths. The first is that it uses an average student count. It actually looks at student growth, a rolling count of how many kids you have. And it, most importantly, adds weight for things that we know should be in a formula. It looks at your poverty, your acute poverty, your concentrated poverty, the amount of English language learners you have, the sparsity of your district, because if you're a rural school district, you might have to spend a lot of money just getting people to school. And it looks at how many charter students you have. It gives a bonus to districts like this one that are trying really hard, that have a high tax effort. But there's some real weaknesses to the formula, and why the formula doesn't sort of solve our problems. The first is that the funding formula purposefully excluded total funding, total need. In other words, the formula is just the division of a pie. It is not how big the pie needs to be. It's just if we're going to distribute $1, here's how much goes to William Penn, here's how much goes to Radnor, here's how much goes to Philadelphia. But it doesn't actually ask how much money we should be spending on our schools. The second is that it only applies to funding added after its adoption. So we distribute about $6 billion in this irrational method. We still distribute $6 billion according to this irrational method. The funding we allocate up and above that, we put through this formula. So right now it's about 7% of our basic education funding actually goes through this formula. If we started over, about $1 billion of money would be redistributed. And it has no real impact on unequal local tax burdens. And the funding formula itself demonstrates how crazy a system we have, because now the funding formula tells us, again, just relatively at least, what the state thinks we should be doing with our education dollars, the state education dollars. And if you just started over, the York School District would get $50 million per year, over $6,000 per child, just from starting over with the formula. The Philadelphia School District would get $2,000 per child if all the money went through the formula, $400 million. This school district would get about $2.3 million, about $400 per child, if we just started over. Now, of course, you're also taking money away from other school districts, and those school districts really also may not have enough. And so it's not an easy solution. It's a solution that has a lot of political challenges. But the point is that the state now has this formula. It doesn't follow the formula effectively. And those same racial inequities that David Masenkis from Power pointed out are made even clearer by the formula. Okay, so he said, okay, well, who does the formula show as being underfunded, right? Because again, we know that most of the money is not going through the formula. Well, who suffers the most from that? Okay, and so he broke school districts into 5 quintiles. Okay, the highest percentage of kids of color are all the way on the left. Okay. That school district, the 5th of school districts with the most kids of color are underfunded according to the formula by $2,000 per child. All the way on the right, the school districts with the least amount of kids of color are overfunded by about $2,000 per child. And of course, the result of all of this are schools that aren't giving our kids what they need. And you would call them achievement gaps, probably more apt to call them opportunity gaps in Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania breaks out its testing results by race, ethnicity, English language learners, economically disadvantaged kids, and children with IEPs. And in every cohort, those kids are doing worse than their white counterparts, which would make sense if those white children are being given more resources. And I'll just skip through this to say, suffice to say, what's going on in Harrisburg, we got a lot of controversy in Harrisburg, we're going to pass a budget, we're ever going to pass a budget. What's being actually proposed shows how small our discussions are in Harrisburg, is a budget that will essentially do nothing for public schools. It's in essence a real world cut. It's less money than even the pension increase, than the fixed costs that districts are facing. So this is not a problem that's ending anytime soon. And so, what are you going to do about it? Well, we're lawyers, so we sue. That face looks familiar. That's because it's this young lady right here, Sheila Armstrong, and I'm really pleased to be on a panel with multiple of our clients in the school funding lawsuit. So in 2014, along with the Education Law Center and Melanie Myers, and on behalf of school districts like this one, and families like Sheila's and families like the Millers, we filed a suit against the state under, and on behalf of the NAACP, who's here, under the state constitution. The state constitution has an education clause in it, and that education clause commands the legislature. It says the legislature shall provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth, something we think they have been ignoring. And also under our equal protection provisions. In other words, about the inequities, the gaps from district to district to district. We think those are irrational and are illegal. So we filed it on behalf of 6 school districts, including, of course, this one. I just want to say that, now that we won, we partially won. We got the chance to go forward. It's like everyone is very happy for this school district. I think actually, though, it was a really courageous step to file this suit to begin with. Well, there's a lot of political pressure on communities not to do it. And so the school districts that did it really deserve a lot of credit. And then, of course, there are parents that stood up and families that stood up, and I'm happy to have a couple of them here. The NAACP and the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools. We're suing both the legislature and the governor, the executive and legislative branches of government. And what we want the court to do is declare the system unconstitutional and order them to come up with something much better, something that befits the dignity of the children of this state. In 2015, April of 2015, our case was dismissed by the Commonwealth Court. They said, this is not a matter for the courts. This is a non-justiciable legal question. In other words, a court cannot tell how much funding is needed. How could a court determine what's an adequate education? There had been previous Pennsylvania Supreme Court decisions which the court was relying on, and which we knew that we were more or less going to have to take on or distinguish in some way. And so we appealed to the Supreme Court in 2016 with a lot of people in this room. We had an oral argument in City Hall. The marching band from the William Penn School District was out there the day before. It was a great 2 days of advocacy, sort of showing to the court how important this was to everyone. I just wanted to focus for 1 minute on the arguments that were made at that argument, at oral argument. We said, you have to hear this case. What they said is, though, the state and the governor, they said that the only obligation that they have under the Constitution, that provision that we talked about, the only obligation they have is to make sure that the doors to schools are unlocked and the lights will go on. And once that threshold is met, they have done their duty. And then the Attorney General, who's representing Governor Wolf, said that no child in this Commonwealth has any right to a sound, quality education, an education of any quality whatsoever. No child has that right. Now at that point, the courtroom let out an audible gasp, and I think the justices were somewhat horrified by that argument, but that is what they have argued. And we said that the court is the only body that is obligated and that has the power to protect our kids, right? There is nowhere else for the school district to go, there is nowhere else for these families to go, right? The system has failed and it's failed for a long time, so where do you want it to go? Anyway, so last month we found out that at least at this stage, we win. What that really means, of course, is that our case is no longer dismissed. All that's left is a small matter of actually proving it, which is a task ahead. So we now go back to the Commonwealth Court. We probably will have a trial in about a year. So it's going to be a long process, a long trial in Harrisburg. And we're going to tell the stories of these school districts, these communities, these families that are really underserved by the legislature's failure to do what it knows needs to be done. I just want to put out one thing about that decision. One of the arguments that have been regularly made is that this is all about local control. Stop interfering with local control of public schools. That these differences are just because local communities have different priorities. Right? Now this school district knows that that's ridiculous, right? That local control can't explain why this school district has to have a tax rate of 3 times higher than its neighbors and still can't have the same amount of funds. And the Pennsylvania School District agreed with that. They said, ultimately, this is the responsibility of the state, and calls to local control cannot absolve this state of its responsibility to fund public schools. And that's what we're going to really argue again at trial. Again, it's about a year away. We think it'll work. What these lawsuits have shown statewide is that they do increase funding. They increase funding for the lowest wealth districts, and as a result, those lowest wealth districts also have increases in achievement scores. So when it's over, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, I'm happy to be here with so many people that have been partners in this fight.